Hey, welcome everyone. Thanks for coming. Oh, hey, welcome everyone. Thanks for coming. Their mic is on. I think it doesn't amplify that much. Can you hear me now? If I talk low like this, can you hear me then? Is that better? Still not better? No. Okay. I'll just talk loud and maybe over here. This is our first AngularJS meetup for San Francisco. We've done them in many other places: Mountain View, New York, Seattle, and Prague, I think. But first one in San Francisco. So thanks so much for coming out tonight. We're going to do a couple things. Is that better? Ah, okay. Igor solves the problem. We're going to start out with an introduction. For those of you who haven't used Angular before, how many of those are you? I've never written an Angular app before. Good. Many of us. Good. Okay, so we're going to walk you through what we think are the coolest bits. Igor is going to do that. And then we're going to deep dive into something we think makes Angular special. There's a lot of special parts about Angular. And Vojta, who's just walking with his backpack there, is going to take us through some of that. So we're going to keep this kind of short. For those of you who have written Angular apps, how many of those folks are here? We do want some time to hang out, answer questions. If you've got code here, we're happy to work on it with you. Igor over here, Brian, and then Mishko, where'd you go? Are the founder of the Angular project, and Vojta can help you with the code questions. I'm the manager. I'm Brad Green. I'm really happy to see so many people come out for this. This is awesome. I'll let Igor take it away and introduce us to Angular.
I would like to introduce Robert. Robert, come just for a second. So the Angular team is located in the Mountain View, but Robert is from San Francisco, and he offered help with running this meetup here in San Francisco. So I would like to thank him a lot for doing this. So we would like to meet here monthly. Robert is going to take care of hosting you guys here. The Angular team, we're going to try to come. I'm not sure that we'll be able to come for every single meetup, but we'll definitely plan for coming here and visiting you. But this meetup is all about you coming together and talking about Angular, making contacts, discussing problems, offering solutions to each other. So the reason why we are here is for you to get to know each other and help each other. And also, we are here to help you as well. So, but please greet your neighbors and make contacts. Thank you, Robert. Okay, so again, my name is Igor Minar. I'm a software engineer at Google, and I'm the team lead on the AngularJS project. And we're going to talk a little bit about Angular and why Angular exists and why would you want to use it and what makes Angular special. So everybody here knows what a browser is, right? Right? Yes. We use them every day. And it's interesting that when you look back, not too many years ago, browsers looked something like this. And they were very simple, and the content that they used to display was very simple, static, quite frankly, boring. So that's why it's incredible to look at the browsers today, and we see something like this. Like, we run all of our emailing, calendaring, we watch videos, play games, and craziest of all, we can run a full-blown IDE in the browser. So as a user, I feel really good about the current state, and I can use these rich applications. There's a lot of content. Everything's really good. But unfortunately, I can't say the same as a developer. The reason for that is the complexity associated with building these really rich applications. And as you probably know, complexity kills. Complexity kills creativity, and it creates this huge barrier between you and the user you're trying to build this awesome app for. What do I mean by complexity? Well, let's take a very simple example of a hello world. We're going to implement it in HTML and then in JavaScript. So in HTML, it's very declarative, and you're basically telling the browser, hey browser, I want you to render a paragraph, and I want you to set the content of the paragraph to be hello world. We're not telling the browser how to do it. We are telling the browser, this is what we would like it to do. This is the end result. And it's up to the browser to figure out how to do it. Now let's compare that to the JavaScript version of the same application. You have to understand how browser works. You also have to understand which events to listen on, how to register the event listeners, how to do the DOM manipulation. Unfortunately, you also have to understand the differences between browsers and work around those. But worst of all is, this is a sequence of steps that you're telling the browser to take. And as a side effect of taking these steps, the hello world will be displayed in the page. So I used to build applications in this way, and I often felt like I was dealing with black magic. Like I was tricking the browser into doing things rather than asking it to help me build this application. Anybody here remembers how we used to do rounded corners before we had border radius? Like all these nested divs and the images? That was just nuts. Like we were tricking the browser. CSS has improved. We can express our intentions better. Unfortunately, we don't see the same kind of improvements happening in DOM and HTML APIs. But you might say, I use jQuery and everything's good. Like I'm this jQuery ninja. But my answer is not really. Things are not so good because jQuery is very imperative. And if you think about it, jQuery shouldn't have existed if the browser APIs were sane and were implemented in a consistent way. The solution I'm looking for is declarative. And just like a hello world example, but something suitable for building applications rather than static pages. If you have WPF or Flex background, you know that data binding solves this problem really nicely. In data binding, you have a model, you bind the model to some template, and let the templating engine figure out how to merge the two and how to keep them in sync. So as my model changes, the view is updated by the templating engine automatically, and as my user interacts with the view, the model will be updated for me by the templating engine. So if the user enters something into the form, the updates just propagate to my model automatically. I don't have to do it. So what you get out of this is this spreadsheet-like system where the updates just happen. Everything is just recalculated on the fly. And you don't have to write too much boilerplate code because you can describe these bindings in very declarative fashion. But this can get even more interesting when you have a collection. In my case, I have a collection of 3 superheroes in an array, and I'm going to bind it to a very simple template using a looping construct. And the templating engine will just figure out how many copies of the template it needs to stamp out and how to data bind each element in the collection to the right copy of the template. And what I get is just a nice list of superheroes. But more importantly, I also get this spreadsheet-like updates. So if I update the model, I push a new superhero object into it, or if I change some existing superhero in the collection, the view will just update for me without me having to do anything. So data binding is really awesome, and it can remove a lot of boilerplate from your application, because if you look at the typical application, you'll notice that about 70 to 80% of the code is just about DOM manipulation. I'm talking about the client-side code. So DOM manipulation, listening on events, updating the DOM, keeping the view and the model in sync. With data binding, all of this goes away. But you might say, but data binding doesn't exist in JavaScript or browsers. Like, what am I talking about? Well, if you use AngularJS, you can actually benefit from data binding because we extended HTML and we added support to HTML for data binding to HTML. You can use it today with current browsers, including IE8 and mobile browsers. So you can totally do it. But we think the data binding is so awesome that there should be native facilities in the browser. And that's why we are working with a team at Google, which is in charge of creating a specification that other browser vendors then look at and implement. And we are working on a specification called model-driven views. The goal of the specification is bring native facilities for doing data binding to the native platform. That will be more efficient. It's going to be just awesome. It's going to take time to get this done. So I wouldn't waste time waiting for MDVs. You can use data binding with AngularJS today. So data binding can help you with a JavaScript boilerplate. But what about the HTML boilerplate? Because HTML can be verbose as well. Let's take a very example of Twitter Bootstrap. Everybody knows about Twitter Bootstrap here? Yeah, I love Twitter Bootstrap. It just makes my HTML look badass by default. And unfortunately, if I want to render tabs like that, I have to go to the Twitter Bootstrap site and go find the tabs component in the documentation and copy paste the big chunk of HTML like this. It doesn't even fit. It's cut off. And find the places where I need to put my content, and then I get the tabs rendered. So I feel like this is not the right thing. It's not very maintainable. This copy pasting business, it just doesn't work for me. And worst of all, I'm again tricking the browser into rendering tabs rather than asking it for rendering the tabs for me. What I want to do is, in my HTML, I just want to say, browser, please render tabs. There are these panes with this content, with these titles. You figure out how the DOM needs to be constructed to render it as tabs. I'm just telling you to render tabs. This is what we call reusable components in Angular. And it's a feature that we added, and you can use it in HTML. So this is how we extend HTML. And it's not just tabs. You can create any kind of component that is suitable for your application. These components can be simple and stateless, or very complicated and stateful. And you can reuse this component in your application, as well as if you have a larger organization, you can reuse them across different projects in your organization. Or in case of tabs, you can just reuse them with many other developers outside of your organization. So it's really up to you how you use this feature. We implemented this in AngularJS using existing DOM and JavaScript APIs, and it's available today in all of the major browsers, including IE8 and mobile browsers. We think that this is, again, a really cool feature and should be part of the native platform. And that's why we're working with another group at Google that is working on the web component specification. And this specification will bring similar components directly to HTML and the native platform. And they're throwing in some extra features that we can't do in JavaScript because it's just not possible to implement them using the existing APIs. This spec is actually currently being already implemented in WebKit and Chrome. So if you have nightly builds, you can start playing with parts of the specification. It's really cool. So I showed you two things. I showed you data binding and I showed you reusable components. These are just two ways how Angular tries to make the existing browser smarter. There are other things like routing, persistence, talking to the server side, all kinds of other things. But I would like to show you what a development with Angular looks like. So let's do some of that now. And again, I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. So just come to the microphone over there, or I'll leave a microphone in front here, and just ask questions if you have any. All right. So the best way to start with Angular is to visit our website, angularjs.org. We have lots of examples on our website where you can see and get a feel of how things work. You can play with the applications right there on the page. We also have some screencasts for many of the examples so you can see how we actually build them step by step. Our documentation is also pretty good. All of the APIs are covered with examples and tests, and there's also some discussion. So if you have questions, you can ask them there or on the mailing list. We have a really nice and growing community, and they'll be happy to answer questions on a mailing list, so you can go there. If you're wondering who uses Angular, the biggest application that we released and we can talk about is DoubleClick. The DoubleClick is part of Google that interfaces with many advertising agencies, and it's in charge of generating a couple of dollars for us. So it's an interesting team to work with. They've been working with Angular for the past year and a half, and they have a lot of experience. I'm actually hoping to get the team lead of the project to come and talk at a meetup either in New York or Mountain View, and we're just going to record it so you can see it as well. So the application I'm going to build is something you haven't seen before. It's a to-do list. Because nobody builds to-do lists these days, so I thought I would implement one. Right now, what you see is a static page, and actually it doesn't even work because in order for me to start, I need a HTTP server. So this is just a simple static HTTP server. There is nothing going on the server side. It's just it's just serving static files. Oops. Alrighty. And if you look at the code, you see that it's just a static HTML. So we have a HTML5 document that is loading some Bootstrap CSS, so the application looks nice. And then we have AngularJS, and we have a to-do.js, which is a file where all the application logic will be. And then we just have static HTML for our application, for our documents. So some headings, some paragraphs, static list of tasks, and then we have a form that doesn't do anything right now. So how could we turn this into an application? In Angular, it's quite simple. You just go and put ng-app somewhere in the documentation in the document, you put it at the root of the application. So you can actually have it somewhere lower in the DOM tree. If you have a round tree application, you can just say only this portion of the document should be Angular application. So, but let's put it on the HTML tag. And I could do something like this now. Username, and if I save, you see that there's nothing here. The reason why there's nothing here is that we haven't defined the model yet. And just to show you what it looks like without ng-app, so if I remove ng-app and save it, you see that we just see the raw template. We see the double curlies there. Just by adding ng-app, Angular knows that this is an Angular application and goes and compiles the template and does the right thing. So for us to be able to actually render the username, we need to provide some context. And this context in Angular application is defined through a controller. So I'm just going to go here. I'm just going to say ng controller equals, and I'll call it app controller. Okay, this still doesn't work because app controller should live somewhere. And in Angular, we have a module system. So we're going to just say that all the pieces of our application are going to live in a to-do app module. If I save it now, it works. The reason why it works is if you look at the to-do.js, is this big enough? Can everybody see? Yes? No? Okay. So if you look at the to-do.js, you see that we are defining the module, and then we have a to-do app module, and on that module we are defining a controller called app controller. So this is what the app controller in the template is referring to. And the app controller is really just a very simple constructor function, which takes one argument called $scope and does some interesting stuff here. For now, just think about $scope as a context that is shared between the controller and the template. And using this context, we're going to publish the model so that it's available to the templating engine. So we take the scope object and we're going to assign username property. Username is something that we defined in our template. And we're just going to say that the value of this model is Igor string. So now if I go here and I refer to username, we know where that comes from. Okay, that was pretty easy. Let's take this list and turn it into a dynamic list so that we can have some model, and we're just going to shrink or extend this list based on the number of elements in our collection. So what I need to do, I need to create a template that we can then clone for each of the elements in a collection. And to do that, I'll just use another construct, ng-repeat. I'm just going to say item in items. Now if I save, you see that we have two new tasks here. So I can throw away this static list because it's too boring for us. And we're just going to focus on this dynamic list. And the reason why we have two task one is because we didn't data bind to the model. So I'm just going to say item.text, and you see that we now have two tasks with different names. The reason why we have two tasks and the place where the model comes from, we have to go to the controller to find that out. So in our controller, we have a very simple native array. Notice that this is not some Angular API, and this is just JavaScript array that contains plain old JavaScript objects with text and done property. And we have two of them. That's why we have two tasks in the view. And we're going to take this items array and we're just going to publish it on scope as a model called items. And that was all that we had to do to render the list of two tasks. Now, if I wanted to see what's the done property, the value of the done property, I can just do this, and now I see that one is false, one is true. Now, the checkbox doesn't reflect the state, doesn't reflect the state of the task right now. The reason for that is that we didn't data bind it yet. So let's use ng-model and say item.done. So we're going to bind it to the done property of the item, where item comes from the collection. It's a temporary variable as we are iterating over. And now you see that checkbox is checked and data binding just works. So as I'm interacting with the checkbox, actually this other data binding is being updated as well. Let's remove this. And let's focus on this part. So how could we get that going? So instead of this placeholder, I want to say render the current length of the array. Array already has a length property, so I can just do items.length. And when I save, you see that I have 2 now here. Perfect, that works. What about remaining? Array doesn't know anything about task or status of done or not done, so we have to create something application specific. And I'm just going to create a method called remaining that will calculate this information for us. And when I save, it actually works because this method is already implemented in the controller. So if I look at the implementation of this, it's on the scope, we're just saying remaining is this function, and the function contains all the information necessary for calculating how many tasks are done and how many are still remaining. To calculate that information, I'm just going to use reduce function, which is a native method that is available in ECMAScript 5 compatible browsers. So on a modern browser, this is a native API. Legacy browser, you'll probably use a polyfill to add this to the browser. And what the function does, it just iterates over the array, checks for all the items that are done, and then increases the counter if we find a task that is done. And at the end, it just returns the count of items. So that's perfect, but what about me changing the status? So if I check or uncheck one of the tasks, you see that the remaining is automatically being recalculated and updating down for me. So that's very nice. I didn't have to do much to get that going. So we have this link here called archive, and what we wanted to do is when I click on the link, I want to remove all the tasks that are already done. So to do that, I'm just going to use ng-click, which is another directive that Angular templating language comes with, and I'm going to call a archive method in our controller. So whenever I click on the link, it will actually go to the controller and invoke that method. And if you look at the implementation of that, we'll see that it's, again, very simple, plain old JavaScript. We're calling filter, another ECMAScript 5 method on array that will just iterate over the array and create a new array containing only those elements that are not done yet. And when we get this new array, we're just going to overwrite the existing array in items and scope items. There is nothing Angular specific here. And that's great because not only the controller doesn't know anything about the view, about the presentation, it's not doing any kind of DOM manipulation. It's not even calling Angular APIs. So it's super easy to test. It's super easy to maintain. And as you start building applications, you'll realize that this is a very nice way of separating concerns. Controller doesn't know anything about the view. It's super easy to test the controller or reuse it in other contexts. So just to double check, yeah, the archive link is working. So how about adding a new task into the list? Right now, if I try to type something and hit the add button, nothing happens. So let's implement that. We have this form down here, and what I want to say is this input field should be bound to something. So I'm just going to take ng-model, which is another directive that creates two-way data binding between the input form control and the model. And I'm going to bind it to new item.text. New item is just an object that is going to be created for this form, and we're going to bind directly to its text property. So when I actually data bind to that property, as I start typing into the input box, the binding down here will automatically update, and I see the current value of the input box there. So we have that data bound, but in order for us to add the new item into the array, we need to call some controller method and provide the logic. So I'm just going to call an add method, and I'm going to pass in the new item. Perfect. And now new task. done. Oh, it's working. Perfect. So when we look at the controller again, we'll see a very simple function which takes the new item. It will construct a new item with the text property set to the text property of the form model, and a done property set to false by default. We're going to take this plain old object and we're going to push it into a native array using the push function, and we're going to clear the text property of the form model by setting it to empty string. So what we get out of that is if you type something here, new task 2, and I hit enter, it will push the new item into the collection and will clear the input. That was super simple. But if I have a input box that is empty and I hit enter, you see that I'm adding empty tasks into the list, and that's not what I want. I would like to disable the functionality if there's nothing in the input box. So the way to do that, I could use just ng disabled directive, and ng disabled takes an expression, and if that expression evaluates to true, then the current element is going to be disabled. So the expression in my case is new item.text is empty, and to do empty I'm just going to use negation so that if it's going to be just false value. Okay, see the button is disabled by default. If I start typing new task, it's enabled, and it's disabled now because it's empty again. Perfect. So this is working. How about making this a little more complicated by saying that we can only take tasks that are 15 characters long? How would we do that? So HTML already has facilities to do that, and we could just use max length set to 15. And now I start typing, and I say my super long I cannot type anymore. Well, unfortunately, this is how HTML works, and it's not very user-friendly. We could do something better. How about we rewrite the max length to ng max length? This is part of our form validation framework, and what it allows us to do is if I start typing my new super long task, the input box will become red. Now, if you look at the CSS and also the element, you'll notice that the element now has a class called ng-invalid. And if you look at the CSS says that if there is an input field with ng-invalid class on it, we're just going to render a red border around this element. So that's how the red appears. And again, if we make it shorter, the validation constraints are just the input is valid and the class is removed, so we can remove the border, and just that happens automatically. Unfortunately, there is one problem with this application. We're not telling the user what's wrong. We're just telling them that this input field is wrong. So we want to display some text, some error message. So let's do that. So I'm just going to create a div, and I'm just going to say item too long. If I save it, you see, oh, item too long. But now there's nothing in the list, and we don't want to display it all the time. We want to conditionally display it. To conditionally display things in Angular, we just use ng-show directive. And ng-show directive takes an expression, which if when this expression evaluates to true, then the entire element is going to be visible. If it evaluates to false, it's going to be invisible. And in order for us to write this expression, we actually have to provide some names for the form so that we can data bind to the validation model of this form. So let's just call this form something like new item form, and this input box, I'm going to give it name new item. So now what I can do is I can say new item form dot new item bind to the error model of this, and specifically the max length. Okay, so it disappeared, and as I start typing my super long task, you see that the CSS kicked in, but also the message is visible. Now start thinking about how would you do this without data binding. What you would have to do? You would have to listen on the input change, so on all keystrokes. You would have to do the validation. You would have to conditionally display and display and hide the messages. There would be a lot of work that you would have to do. But because of data binding and the declarative nature of data binding, it's super simple. Just by adding, two attributes, or actually one attribute here and one attribute to specify the validation constraints, you can just get this done very easily. So we have a very simple application going, and if I try to add a lot of tasks, and I refresh this page, everything resets. The reason why it resets, so the reason why it resets is the persistence. There is no persistence in this application. And Vojta is going to show us how this persistence works and how dependency injection, another feature that we added to Angular and something else that makes the existing browser smarter, can help you with implementing persistence in this application. Do you want to start now?
Yeah, maybe a little short break to switch the computer.
Sure. We're going to take a short break. I'm happy to answer questions. So if you have questions, go to the microphone and ask questions. And Vojta's going to get ready in the meantime, and then we're going to continue with persistence and dependency injection.
So I need cable. So you use this guy? No.
That's right. Yeah, just plug this in.
This one?
Yeah.
Awesome. Sorry for interrupting, but I think it's good if we do this rather than if you did the same thing and that.
So anybody has any questions? I showed you a lot of stuff. I showed you the data binding. I showed you form validation. There are other things like routing that I didn't even get to.
I have a question just about, you mentioned jQuery. Have you tested it alongside jQuery? If no problems or there's some conflicts?
There are no problems. In fact, you can use jQuery and Angular together.
Yeah.
The way we implemented this is if a jQuery is present on the current page, we're actually going to use jQuery for all of our DOM manipulation. If jQuery is not present, we have a tiny subset of jQuery, which we re-implemented. We're going to use that instead. There are many people who are integrating Angular with jQuery UI widgets. So if you have like a date picker or many of the other existing widgets, you can integrate them with Angular. And there are APIs to do this integration.
Very cool. Thank you.
Quick question about the error handling. Is there a way to have it a dynamic error handling instead of the declarative like max length? Can you add custom or more complex?
You can. So one thing about Angular is that we try to make everything extensible. So not only I showed you the ng repeat, ng show. All of these things we call directives are implemented on top of APIs that we expose. So you can implement all of them in your own way if you find that whatever we provide is not suitable. The same thing applies to validation. It's completely customizable. If you want to have your own validation rules, there are APIs you can use to hook into the validation system and just do your own validation.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, can you use the data binding to set CSS values?
Yes, I didn't show that, but you can totally bind to any text or text value or attribute anywhere in the DOM. And actually, you can even data bind to SVG elements or XML if it's embedded in the document.
Oh, cool. So can you do also any sort of math inside there, like in a gen?
Yeah. So again, I didn't have time for that, but
Man, you're leaving out all the good stuff.
The expression language is quite flexible. It allows you to do like string concatenation, mathematical operations, but intentionally we are trying to make it so it's flexible but limiting at the same time, because we don't want you to put too much logic in the template. The business logic should live in the controller, and that the expressions and the templates should just hook into the controller and call all the business logic in the controller. Because by doing that, the controller, the business logic remains in the controller, and it's easy to test there.
Sure.
Hi, you were just using the Python simple HTTP server, but the page was reloading as soon as you saved a change. What was up with that?
Live Reload, it's an extension for Chrome. You can just install it. And
It just
yeah, so Google Live Reload.
okay.
So.
One question I had is, I implemented a lot of these types of features, data binding, earlier. How are you going to get adoption in other browsers of these features?
How do we get adoption?
Yeah, because you said some of this right now is JavaScript and DOM, but you want to make it the more advanced features, the web components, to actually be have to be implemented by the browsers themselves directly. And how are you going to do that?
How do we get other browser vendors to implement it?
Yeah.
Well, first we need the spec that is awesome, and we need to show them that there are huge performance, but also productivity benefits to using data binding. And like we see it every day, people, as soon as they start using data binding, they're like, how did I build applications before? So once we have the spec ready, then I don't think we'll have such a hard time convincing other browser vendors to implement this. Ready? Try once you do that. Try to like not telefon povedal, že tennis injection toto. Tak let's talk about what that means. You know what I mean?
Not sure.
So it's like the concept.
Maybe we'll get it if I just.
Yeah, but just okay, whatever.
I don't know. I will do something.
Just put your finger here so that it doesn't go into.
Then I need to press this guy. Okay. Cool.
Okay, guys, we are ready to continue with the second part of the presentation. And we're going to talk about dependency injection and how dependency injection makes applications in Angular applications easy to test and easy to structure. Okay, I think we can start.
Thanks, Igor. Hey guys, my name is Vojta, and I work with these crazy guys on AngularJS. And today I would like to show you dependency injection, which is a really important part of Angular. It does a lot of magic. So first, let me explain what is dependency injection.
Dependency injection. Dependency injection in object-oriented computer programming is a design pattern with a core principle of separating behavior from dependency resolution.
See, that simple it is. Alright, thanks for watching, guys. No, seriously, why should you care about dependency injection? I mean, what are the benefits that you can get from using it? Well, it will help you to write code that is easy to maintain, and as a result of that, you will be more productive. And that's something you should definitely care about, right? So being more productive, that sounds good, but how is this thing gonna make me more productive? I mean, is it gonna stop me watching YouTube? Not really, it's not that cool. But less code? I mean, usually when you write an application, you write these small units, and each of those units takes care of part of the functionality of the whole system, right? And then you need to wire all these units together. And that's exactly what dependency injection does for you. It wires all these things together automatically. And by the way, less code, that doesn't mean just less typing, but that's less reading, less code to understand, and less code to refactor. Next, it will help you to write easier code that is easier to extend. So anything like adding new object, adding new dependency into your system, or refactoring your current architecture, just rewiring the structure somehow, or things like having different instrumentation in different environments. For instance, you want to do some debugging instrumentation during development, but you don't want to do that in production. All these tasks are way easier to do with dependency injection because the whole system is more flexible. And the last thing, my favorite one, it is easier to test. All right, so try to remember these things, because now I would like to do some real concrete examples of these benefits, how this flexible system will help you, and how I want to show you how easy it is to do testing with Angular and dependency injection. All right, so let's do coding. This is gonna be a surprise, but guess what? I did the same application as Igor. Basically, Angular is really cool if you wanna build to-do app. Like it really rocks, right? So I don't have to explain this app because Igor already did that, and I'm basically roughly at the same stage when he ended. So the app is cool, but if I do some changes, like removing these two items, and I refresh, I got the same items again because it's hard coded in the controller, and there's no storage, nothing like that. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna create persistent storage. I'm gonna use MongoLab, which is really awesome storage in the cloud. They basically provide you MongoDB plus RESTful API. So I already created an account, and we're gonna use that. Let me show you the code. Here's the template, and here's the controller. And of course, we have our unit test as well. So now, my idea is I would like to abstract this whole logic, all the stuff that is related to MongoLab, I would like to abstract that into a separate object. In Angular, we call that service, so let's call it service for now. And this service will be responsible for sending all the requests, setting proper headers, parsing the response, and all this stuff related to MongoLab. You can think about it as a model. So let's call it item resource. And we're going to replace these static hard-coded items with, say, item.query or something. And this call will basically fetch the data from MongoLab. All right, so far so good. But here's the first problem. Where do I get this item object? I mean, the first thing I can do is just instantiate it on my own. So I can do item equals new resource item or something, and it's gonna parse the response. So let's say it requires some JSON parser and maybe some XHR, like low-level facility, basically to send the actual request. All right, this looks good. I mean, I think this would work. Can you think anything bad with this? I mean, come on, it's just one line of code. Is there anything suspicious? Or? Okay, so the first thing I don't like about it, the first issue, is that this controller knows too much. This controller needs to know what is the constructor of this item, its resource item, and it needs to know how to instantiate this constructor, right? So the whole idea of abstracting and encapsulating all this logic into a separate object to make it, nice and easy to understand is kind of broken, because now this controller needs to know how to instantiate this thing. So all this information is kind of leaking into this controller, and as a result of that, it is really difficult to maintain this code, because if I, for some reason, decide to change JSON to XML, I need to go through all the controllers that are using this resource item, and I need to change this into XML parser. And this controller really doesn't care about that. Like, this controller doesn't consume XML or JSON, right? So it should not be aware of that. So that's my first issue with that. How about testing? How would you test this, guys? Brian, can you actually bring me something to drink? Thanks. How would you test this? I'm sorry? Monkey patch. Yes. So basically, it would be possible. It would be really difficult, but it would be possible. Because the resource item, this constructor is defined on window objects, so you could monkey patch that. But the trouble with that, it is a lot of hard work, and you need to be careful about, cleaning. You need to clean up after every test. Because otherwise, you will have these conflicts where one unit test affects the other unit test, and it's kind of tricky to debug, and I don't like that. It's really difficult to test that code. So as a result of that, no one will test that, right? That's the trouble. All right, one more thing I don't like about this code, and that's something we call hidden dependencies. Because basically, this constructor is lying to you. Because if you want to instantiate this controller just standalone, and you look onto this constructor and you see, it requires a scope, so I'm good. But then you try to instantiate it, and in the background it will create a resource item and try to fetch data from a server, right? And it's really bad even for understanding the code, because you look into this constructor, you see, okay, it needs scope, but then you need to read the whole constructor to actually see all the real dependencies, right? So hidden dependencies, another issue. Okay, let's make it better. Let's use something that is called factory. So we define this object and method get resource item, and this function is gonna return just new instance of resource item, and it will pass instance of this parser and get XHR. So we need these methods as well, like get parser and get XHR. Now we can change this line to call factory instead. And it is a lot of code, but it turns out that this is way better than the previous one, because this actually solves a lot of issues. For instance, the first thing is now we just separated the behavior, which is in the controller, from dependency resolution, which is in the factory. So now if you decide to change a JSON parser to XML parser, it's easy. There is just one place to do that, right? In this factory. Another good thing is that now the controller doesn't need to know how to instantiate this service, right? It still needs to know where to find it. It needs to know that this factory and call this method, which it's still not good, but at least it's not transitive. So it needs to know where to find its direct dependencies, right? So that's better as well. We still have hidden dependencies, right? That's still the same. How about testing this code? How would you test this code? Any ideas? Come on, guys. I'm pretty sure you know how to test that.
Mock object.
Mock object. Okay. I'm not sure what you mean with that. Yes. That's definitely a way to go. So again, we would monkey patch the factory. So basically, it looks a little bit less ugly, but it's completely the same thing that we were doing with the previous example. We need to monkey patch this global state, which is the factory. So again, we have the same issues with cleaning up, right? So again, for me, this is difficult to test. All right, let's use dependency injection then. Let's use this Hollywood principle, which says, don't call us, we will call you. And check out this, guys. This is my favorite refactoring. You take this factory, you just remove it, and you take this line and you remove it. And instead, you just ask for this dependency in the constructor. And that's all. We are done. And it turns out that this actually solved all the issues that we just discussed. We still have the separation of behavior and dependency resolution. There is no hidden dependency. So you look into this constructor and you can exactly see what are the dependencies, so it can help you as a documentation as well. And the best thing, this controller has no idea how to construct this item or where to get it. It will just get it passed in, right? And dependency injection will take care of that. All right, I can show you the app that it really works. But now if I refresh the page, you can see there is a request to MongoLab, and I'm getting these items from the server. Okay. Do you have any questions to that? Wasn't that funny? I'm glad for that.
Where do you pass in the item?
That's a good question. That's magic. I will show you in a second. Any other questions? Okay, let's move on. So this was kind of like general ideas behind dependency injection. I mean, I would say problems that dependency injection solves. And that's something you can apply pretty much to any language, right? So now let's go a little bit more into Angular world and see how it goes in Angular.
What about the main method?
Main method?
Yeah. Where's the main method in this application?
It's hidden. Mishka would say there is no hidden method, but I mean, I think it's something I can explain in a second as well.
Okay.
Right?
Just don't forget.
Okay. You can remind me if I do forget.
I will remind you.
I know you will. So we know how to ask for things, right? That's easy. You just add an argument into a constructor and you will get it, because Angular, whenever Angular needs to instantiate anything like controller, directive, or anything, it will ask dependency, it will ask injector to do that. So that's easy. But the question is, how does injector knows what to inject? You know, that's exactly your question. And the answer to this question is modules. So basically, I mean, Angular module is nothing more than just a set of definitions. So in this case, we are creating one module that is called to-do, and then we are adding first definition, how to construct app controller. It's basically constructor, right? And another definition is here, where we are saying this is way how to create item service, right? So again, it's sort of constructor. And then we are coming to the main method, to the hidden main method, because when Angular is starting the application, the first thing it does, it creates an injector. It creates injector and it loads specific modules, right? And you can specify these modules in HTML in ng app. This is basically where we are saying ng app equals to do, so that means this is the root element of my app. And to-do is the module that I want you to load. So in the main method, which is actually registered as a listener on document content loaded, so when the page is like loaded, Angular will call this main method, and this main method will create new injector and load this module. And then the entire system, any unit from this whole system, can ask for anything that was provided before, like by loading some module, right? So in order to ask for anything you want to ask for, you need to provide that first through modules. Does it make sense? Okay. So we know how to ask for things, just adding argument into constructor, and we know how to provide things through modules. We basically create modules, which is a set of definitions, and then we configure the injector with these modules. Simple. Now, let's see some more interesting stuff that you can do with all of this flexibility. In Angular, whenever there is an error, Angular always delegates exception handling to a service that is called exception handler. Right? Let's see how this works. Let's do throw new error, some error. And now, if I try to add an item, I will get this error. Nothing super cool, right? But the thing is, well, because the default implementation of exception handler will just dump it into console, right? But with dependency injection, I can easily provide a different version. So I can say, hey, injector, use this version of exception handler, and this one will just alert, right? And now, if I do the same thing again, there you go. We have alert instead of dumping it into console. And if you think about this, like, we just changed the behavior of the entire system. Because now, when there's any exception inside Angular or whenever, it will always be delegated to alert instead of dumping to console. So it is super easy to do things like, I mean, during development, you probably want to throw the exception. But in production, you maybe don't want to do that, and instead you want to send error report to your server in the background or something. You know, and dependency injection gives you this sort of flexibility to do that easily. Sure. You mean this?
Yeah.
Okay. One more example of this flexibility. Let me remove this error first. This is the item service that is responsible for all the communication with MongoLab, right? And there is something called API key, which is basically sort of authentication with MongoLab, and it is hard-coded. So let's say that now I decided to refactor that. I decided that I need to have different API key for development and different API key for production. So this kind of refactoring is easy because I just take out this string, and instead of hard-coding it, I will just ask for it, right? And I will provide this value. And I can provide different value in production or, you know, whatever your environment is. And this is, for me, this is really important. For instance, last 2 or 3 weeks, I've been working on TextDrive, which is a text editor for Chromebook. And I was basically I was using really unstable APIs because Chrome guys, they were working on that. So basically, I did something one day, and the other day, it was completely broken because they changed the API. So I had to change my sort of like architecture and everything. And guess what? The very next day, it was broken again because some other changes. So result of that is that, you know, your awesome architecture that you originally designed suddenly is not that awesome. It doesn't fit the current state. And I strongly believe that the only way how to keep this fresh, keep it nice and clean and readable, is just to keep refactoring, right? And that was exactly the point when I realized, oh my God, this dependency injection stuff is awesome because I can easily rewire all the stuff. You know, I can just say, oh, now this service, it makes really no sense to do that inside this service, so I'll move this functionality to another service, you know, and it's piece of cake. It's just so easy to do that. And the thing is that you only do these things if it is easy. Like, if it was difficult for me, this kind of refactoring, I would be like, yeah, you know, it works, so I can, you know, I can live with that. So if that's the reason why it's important to, you know, have these operations to be easy, because then you do them. Okay, I think that's the best example of how flexible this whole system is. It's an extension that we have. It's called Batarang, and it's something that Brian Ford did. And I think Brian might show us how this works and how awesome it is, and how important dependency injection was in order to make this happen. So should work.
You have it up there? Which way do I go?
All right, so Batarang is the name for our debug extension for Chrome, because Angular debug extension for Chrome is a really boring name. Here. All right, this works. Okay, so anyway, it hooks right into the Chrome developer tools, and it uses some cool features of dependency injection to let us see things about our application. So one cool thing that it does is, you remember that scope object before? So in addition to, just requesting objects, you can also, once an object has been registered into the dependency injection system, you can ask for it, make some changes to it, and then pass it along, and that object is changed then statewide. So one of the things that we were able to do was then we were able to keep track of all of the models attached to all of the scopes in the application, and then build up this visualization here, so you can modify some of this stuff. And you see it's updated in the application up here. So then there's also some cool things that you can do to measure the performance of your application. Again, the basic strategy is, you have the natural scrolling, this is throwing me off. All right, you can kind of see it on the side there. Is there a way for me to change the size of this?
Command minus. Can you focus this? No.
Here, I think you need to pop the window out. All right, there we go. That's a little bit better. Okay, so like the basic strategy here is around when Angular is watching your different models for changes. Typically, it would be really annoying to go through and try and profile your entire application. But with dependency injection, we can say, give me this function. I'm going to wrap, start timer, regular function, stop timer, pass that back into the system, and now you can profile, all these different things with just a few lines of code. And I'm not sure, does anyone have a great idea of how you do that otherwise? I mean, the only other thing I've seen, in your typical import kind of system is, you have to manually wrap around all these things. It's really frustrating and difficult to try and add profiling to your entire application. So, I mean, there's lots of other cool tricks that you can do as well, but these are just some examples. So, any questions?
Where can I get the extension?
That's a good question.
Igor has always good questions.
Yeah, Igor, you're full of good questions. So if you check out the Angular blog, underneath here, we have a post on it that I just went past. Yeah, I know. Your scrolling is really confusing to me.
Sorry, guys.
And yeah, your window is also kind of resized weird. Can you fix it? There we go, that's what we want. Yeah, so there's instructions here on getting it. Right now you need to use Chrome Canary because we're using some cool new features that are like really bleeding edge in Canary. They'll reach the the stable build of Chrome soon, and then we'll be able to put this in the web store and it'll be super easy. But if you're interested in it now, there are instructions. You have to enable some flags and stuff, but then you're good to go.
Cool.
Yep.
Thanks a lot, Brian.
Yeah, no problem.
That's awesome. It's awesome stuff. I mean, this guy is awesome as well, but. Okay, I think I mentioned testing so many times, so let's see some cool examples. How can Angular make easier the whole testing, So let me do this first. All right. So here's our unit test. I was originally passing, but now we did this thing with MongoLab, right? So let me execute these tests. Yeah. If you want to complain about name of this project, somewhere in the back there's a Meshko. He is the author of the name, so just so that you know.
So what is this testacular thing you're using? I heard something about it being a spectacular test runner.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Oh.
Yeah, so Testacular is a test runner to execute your unit tests on real browsers, right, or real devices. So now I'm gonna run all these unit tests in a Chrome, but you can run it on phone or whatever you want, directly from command line or your IDE, and it can watch all the files as well and automatically run the tests. That's something that I'm gonna use now. So you can see if I save the file, it will immediately execute all the tests. And you can see that now these tests are failing. And the reason why they are failing, it's complaining that unexpected request gets to blah, blah, blah. And the reason for that...
Sorry, what is this describe and it stuff?
Sorry, yeah, I forgot to mention that. So these unit tests, some of you probably already know this. It's written in Jasmine, which is really awesome testing framework that we really like. But honestly, you can use any testing framework you like. But with Jasmine, Angular gives you some helpers to make the make the whole testing even more easier. So for instance, the first helper function is this module function, which basically helps you to load a module during your unit test. Because what happens in the background, for every spec, we create fresh new injector, right? So you don't have to worry about any cleaning, because every unit test gets a whole fresh new environment with a new injector, right? And this module function, that's just for loading a module. So you can see before each spec, I'm loading this to-do module, which is basically my app. So in order to test it, I need to load it. All right, now these tests are failing because this unexpected request. And the reason for that is if we go back to the controller, here's the source of trouble. Item query, this guy tries to send XHR request to server. And that's something we don't want to do. Ideally, I would like to test this controller, ignoring all the server-side communication. Just test this logic in this controller. And it turns out that with dependency injection, you can do that really easily. Because what I can do, I can use different implementation of this resource item. So I already wrote this mock version. And this mock is something we called, it has the same API as the original service, but it does nothing. It just pretends to, send a request to server, but actually it does nothing. These are just empty functions. And I'm registering that into mocks.item module so that I can use it during testing. So now if I go back to the unit test, and I load this mock module as well, so I do mocks.item, and again I save the file, it immediately executes all these unit tests, and now they are passing. And why they are passing? Well, because in the controller, this item is not the real one. The controller has no idea what it is because it has the same API, the same method, so it doesn't complain. But during these unit tests, I'm injecting this mock version, the fake version of this item, and this one doesn't do any XHRs at all. Instead, it just returns empty array. This method returns an empty array, and this guy, like item $save, it's just empty function. It does nothing. So I can focus on my logic in the controller and just ignore the whole server-side business, right? Does it make sense? Okay. All right.
Can you go back to the declaration of item mock?
Yes. So you can see it's just empty object with these two methods, and I said they were empty functions, but actually I'm using Jasmine Spy, which is something, so that I can assert whether it was called or not, right? But it does nothing. So you can think about it as empty function.
Where do you register the mock item? Is the item that's going to be passed to the...
Because here I'm creating another module, and this module is not loaded during production, but during my unit test, no, this one, I'm loading this module as well, right? Yes?
Could you explain the Angular part? Go back to item mock.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a call Angular module. It passes a name and then the data and then dot value item mock.
Yeah, let's make it more explicit. So this first line creates a module, and then I add this definition to the module, right? That's the same thing that I was doing before, but this is, I guess, this is easier to understand. I'm sorry. Cool.
So the production code uses module.factory, but the test code uses module.value. What's the difference?
Igor, again. You always ask me these questions. Okay. Well, okay, I will try to explain that.
Sorry, I don't mean to bother you.
That's okay. I still love you. So, that's a good question. That was the same, like this guy used factory to register, to add this definition into a module. And when I was doing the previous one with exception handler, I was actually using value, right? This is something what I was doing, I believe. And there is a bunch of other methods as well, but they are basically just different ways of doing the same thing. So they all do the same thing. They register this definition. They tell us injector how to construct something, right? And the only difference is that value actually registers the concrete instance, right? So this function is the actual instance that will be injected into the whole system, right? But factory, that's a function that will be called in order to create the instance. So this function will get called once, and as a result, it returns the instance, and that's the instance that then will be passed around in your application. So basically, this exception handler, I could change that into factory, and I would do function, return function, and this would do the same as the value. Does it make sense? Right? But the thing is that in this function, I don't need any injection. I don't need inject any argument, so I can just define it as value. That's why I decided to use value. But this is the same. This is different syntax. Yes, I can inject something into this factory function. So I can ask for dollar window, and I can ask $window.alert instead.
So $window is just a service that provides the window of the current
It's just a
application.
wrapper around
It's just
the browser's window object so that you can pass some mocks in testing. All right, let's go back to testing. One more thing I want to show you. We just ignored completely the whole communication with MongoLab, right? And you might point out that's something you want to test as well. I mean, yes, I want to be sure that the correct requests are sent and that my controller and my whole app works with the data that I get back from MongoLab. So yes, I can do that. And I already wrote unit test for that. What was that? This guy. And I think this is a good time to explain the other helper function that we provide you to make testing with Jasmine easier, and this function is inject. Because I told you that every test gets fresh new injector, right? And this inject function basically gives you the same luxury of just asking for stuff as you have in the production code, right? So if you're defining controller or directive or something, you can just ask for things and you will get it. And if you use this inject function in a unit test, you will get the same luxury. So this inject function basically delegates, it invokes the given function through injector, right? So that injector takes care of instantiating all the dependencies and all that stuff. So the result is that I can easily ask for any service. I can ask for $controller, root scope, $HTTP backend, and I will just get it. I don't have to instantiate them. I don't have to look them up. Okay?
How does Angular know what to inject?
Well, it's based on what you provide with these modules, and it's based on the string names. So if I go back to my controller, this controller is asking for a scope and asking for item. And these names, they need to match, right? So you're asking for item, and here, down here, I'm providing this item. And these strings are exactly the same. That's how injector knows, you know, what to inject. So in a different words, order of these arguments doesn't really matter. I can change that, and it's still gonna work the same, because the order of the arguments doesn't really matter, because this function is injected. So it looks the name of the argument, and based on the name of the argument, it will inject the correct instance.
Can we load 2 modules at a time?
I'm sorry, say again?
Can we load 2 modules at a time?
Of course. And modules can depend on each other.
What if there are some duplicate objects at a time?
I'm sorry, to repeat the question was whether we can we load multiple modules, and the answer is yes. You can have like structure, like one module can depend on another module.
What if there is another item in another module? You have two bindings for item.
Then it's overridden. Just the last one win. Okay, let me finish this thing, and that's this guy. So you can ask for things during unit test as well. That's cool. And another cool thing about Angular is this HTTP backend stuff. Because in the previous example, I mocked out completely the service. So it's just a set of empty functions. But that means you have to write mock for like every expensive service, right? And it turns out that Angular has something that's called HTTP service, and this service is responsible for all the low-level stuff with, it sends all the requests. So even my item resource, at the end of the day, it sends the request through HTTP. So Angular provides us mock version of this HTTP service. And that's what we are using here. So this HTTP service, it's not the real one. It's a mock version. It's fake service that just pretends to send requests, but it doesn't send them. It just pretends them and respond with some fake data. So, and in addition to that, it has some more APIs suitable for testing. So this guy has method expect get, and you can basically train this mock version, this mock HTTP backend. You're training it like, hey, expect get request to this URL and then respond these fake data. And these data are defined right here, and you can see that it's basically dump data from MongoLab. So I can assert whether my controller works properly with kind of real data, without actually sending XHR requests to the server. So all these unit tests, there's nothing expensive like that. So you can execute like thousands of these unit tests in a matter of seconds. I always like to say that you should never trust any unit test without seeing it fail. So let me show you that this really works. You can see we have now 7 unit tests, and let me show you. This is a unit test for add method. So it basically tests whether we send the post request to MongoLab, right? And it says expect post request to this URL and expect these data. So if we go to the controller to add method, this item $save, that's the guy who eventually triggers this request. So if I comment out this guy and execute a test, you can see it fails unsatisfied request post to this URL, because it was expecting this request, but this request never happened, right? So let's fix that. And last thing, we are expecting these data, but I can change that to expect to set the text to something. So now it's gonna fail, and you can see there is a different error because now it says, "Hey, expected post request to this URL with different data." So it expected this request, but the data was different. The expected text was fake task, but it actually got something, right? So with these mocks, you can actually unit test the whole system, whether it works as it's expected, really cheaply without doing any real XHRs. Because you can just train this mock version of HTTP to pretend to be your server, but, you know, and the rest of the system has no idea about that because the APIs are the same. So, and dependency injection, that's the guy who allows you, who enables you to do that. Okay, unless you have any questions, I think I'm done.
Scope is another, basically it's the instance of the control.
Not really. Controller is basically a decorator function that gets scope. So controller basically publish all the stuff that it needs to be accessible in template. It publish this stuff onto scope.
So the scope is like a context that is associated with the controller.
Yeah, so scope basically is the context that's shared with the view and holds all the
Yes.
data provided.
Yes. Yes.
And where do we find out about all the services that come wrapped up with AngularJS?
You can search, you can look up our documentation. I think that's the best way.
Docs.angularjs.org.
Yes.
We have the complete list of all the services available and also examples of how you would use these services. But as Wojtek showed, we provide you some services for very basic stuff. But as you start building applications, you'll see that you want to build your own services. Angular is not this constrained box that you get what we provide you with. We actually just provide you with the minimum amount of APIs that are necessary for very common tasks. But we expect people to just build components that they'll use and they'll extend Angular with through dependency injection or through other APIs. The templating engine is completely extensible as well. Another question? Can you come to the mic, please?
So it's a little bit less of a question, more just of a comment, maybe discussion point. So the dependency injection is super, super powerful. Could you just go quickly back to the todo.js and go to the place where you're binding the values to the app, like the API key?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, one idea I was thinking, and I don't know if you guys have considered this, it seems to me it could be very powerful to be able to do some of the dependency injection definitions, particularly around the values, declaratively as a like, so for example, instead of saying to-do.value API key is this string, to be able to have a JSON object that declaratively defines all of these bindings, and then maybe be able to take that JSON object and pull it out of the actual code so that it's extrinsic, so you can maybe point to it and have it like maybe at the other end of a URL, or even potentially even have it stored in a database where you could kind of pull it out. So the idea of the code's over here, the bindings of all the values are declaratively JSON.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
The only trouble with current implementation of the injector would be that you need these values to get them before you instantiate the injector. So kind of like this is something we would have to solve. But otherwise, I like that idea.
Yeah, I'd love to offline maybe discuss it. So,
yeah,
cool.
Thanks. So thank you very much, guys. I think I'm done. But I'm happy to discuss anything afterwards. Like, thanks a lot for watching. Thanks.